Okay, so I guess we all know the drill of this. Xindi, you want to introduce the idea behind what we're doing? Max, I'll introduce you, and then let's have a chat.
hmm Yeah, sounds awesome. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for
I'll try to
coming.
not waste your time.
Thanks also everyone for being here on a Saturday night. We really appreciate you guys being here. And thanks to Galene and Shiloh for also doing technical stuff. You guys rule.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So a few introductory remarks for our many fans here in the audience. As some of you already know, we are at the School of Advanced Studies in Tumen, Siberia. This is where Devin and I are teaching a course called Fashion and Philosophy. Again, we are not professors of fashion. We are professors of philosophy, the philosophy of technology specifically. Yeah, we didn't want to simply apply philosophy to fashion. And if we did, I'm sure we could ask ChatGPT to do it for us. So, as we say in the syllabus, the course is actually based on an oft forgotten word in the title, the word and. Not the fashion of philosophy. We won't ask you who had a better outfit, Husserl or Hegel. And it's not fashion or philosophy because we won't ask you to choose. It's fashion and philosophy. So we wanted to see how the fashion industry was already answering philosophical questions. So we decided to start with practices in the fashion industry and build philosophically meaningful discourses on the basis of those practices. We obviously couldn't do that by ourselves as humble academics. We needed people in the industry like Maxime to guide us. So over the next 2 weeks, we'll have visiting lecturers coming to speak with us remotely. Okay, so Devin and I will moderate and have a conversation with Maxime, and then we'll invite every one of you to join in on the conversation with questions and comments after the fact.
And this includes our online audience if people were able to wake up for this. So yeah, both physical and online. I wrote this introduction for Maxime today. It was hard to figure out what to put in it, namely because he's done so many things. And so I am just going to, rather than list accolades, give you a sample of this. Maxime Plescia-Buchi is a Swiss tattooist, creative director, and founder of Sang Bleu, which now comes to encompass a series of tattoo studios under a larger creative industry, creative agency and brand. Maxime's also a collaborator with Hublot, a Swiss watch company, which if I ever become a famous academic, one day maybe I will be able to afford one. So that's the ambition. I first encountered Maxime through his namesake magazine, which is called Songbleu, and this was over a decade ago. This was the first magazine, at least to my knowledge, that seriously put tattooing into a meaningful dialogue with fine arts, fashion, and larger cultural issues around sexuality, around the construction of identity, and around the body. Maxime, Xindi, and I are going to have a conversation on the basis of a few stories. So we're going to tell you some stories. We're calling them parables. And we'll use these as starting points for our project today, which Maxime has aptly titled In Search of Focal Points for the Deconstruction of Tattooing Practices. So let's please give a round of applause for Maxime Plescia-Buchi.
Thank you.
You want to start us off, Max?
Yeah, I think yeah, thank you so much for the invitation. This is quite exciting for a lot of reasons, especially the fact that we will get to hopefully scratch the surface or approach the surface of very deep themes. I think that that have a lot of can be applied. We can use this conversation here as a proxy or a starting point for things that essentially yeah can apply to a lot of dynamics going on worldwide, in every aspect of life, and each individual's search for agency, the ability to feel themselves exist in the world, to feel a grasp on reality, and a meaningfulness in their action, and the reaction they get from the environment, and yeah, hopefully a dialogue. I feel that the question of, I mean, I don't like the term identity, but and it's not what today is about, or not the only thing, but I feel it is an extremely, the world today has made most power dynamics about identities for good or bad reasons, but it is the way things have been formulated today, and we need to be able to react accordingly, so to be able to understand what it means, what it doesn't mean as well, to be able to refuse those definitions when they need to be refused, and bring back the conversation where it should be, if it's not really what it should be about. So anyway, I think today hopefully we can use extremely practical, extremely specific examples in a fairly specific practice that tattooing is, as the beginning of some interesting and important discussions that will go beyond that, hopefully. So yeah, thank you so much. It's something that I have been thinking about my whole life under some forms, and even before I was a tattooist myself. I think I brought into tattooing, and it helped me every day. This practice helped me simplify, or at least distill a reflection that I had, ongoing reflections that I had before, and truly helped me, formulate those questionings in much more precise and succinct terms, and therefore start building answers that I can also start applying beyond. And yeah, every day looking at social media, looking at the news, I do use a lot of those elements of in French you say élément de réponse. I don't know if anyone speaks French. I'll have to. Sometimes I don't know the terms in English, but yeah, so the bits or leads to answer those questions that I use every day in everyday life as well. So this is very, very exciting. Many of my clients can probably vouch that during long hours they were getting tattooed and in pain, and probably hoping to be anywhere but where they were. They had to endure my long monologues on the themes that we will discuss today. Hopefully you're now by your own will there, and hopefully it can be fun and exciting. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Maxime. Do you want to so you know, the first part of this organized around these stories, do you want to tell yours first? I can go first. Your call.
Yeah, I think so the way, so we thought we would each give a little anecdote that we experienced as tattooed people, as people involved in tattooing. Let's not differentiate the sort of giver and receiver thing at this point. I think each one of us will give a little story, and we can sort of discuss what this story can mean and how it can be looked at. So for me, I will start with an anecdote, something that happened to me before I was a tattooist, before even I got tattooed. And I remember having a conversation with, I remember being at my mom's house, and there was a dinner with some family friends. And there was this lady, university professor, very smart person, quite charismatic, family friend, well, my mom's generation, who whom I had known my whole life to look exactly the same. And it's quite interesting in this case in particular, because she always, for as long as I knew her, so pretty much my whole life, had the same haircut, that she dyed in the same way. She wears glasses, almost always the same kind of outfit, and with a thing that defied time, pretty much, like to a point that it was, it's kind of uncanny. And still to this day, I bumped into her last summer, as we visited my hometown, and she still looks exactly the same. So it was just around the time I was just about to start getting tattooed myself, and I think I had just made an appointment, or I had a first consultation with a tattoo artist I was getting tattooed by, and I shared that I was very excited, and maybe slightly defiantly, whatever, whatever the motivations were, but I shared that over dinner, and this person had an extremely strong response to this, in a way that I didn't quite, I don't know, like I didn't, I expected some reactions, but hopefully some form of dialogue, some sort of discussion, which is not quite what happened. And this person sort of jumped and started a rant, and explaining like how this is a crazy decision, and how it's permanent, and how could I do that at my age, etc. And I remember very distinctively trying and failing, but trying to be to tell her, look, you have looked the same way your entire life. What truly is the difference between making a decision to do exactly what you did? The result is the same. The result is that I'm choosing something that will not define, but have a very perceptible incidence on the way I look, for the rest of my life. Yes, and I will then sort of have to work with this. Yes, but and I tried to ask her. I didn't have answers necessarily at that time. Now I do. I have some ideas to answer that question. But I asked her, what is the difference, if any, between what you're doing and what is this? The conversation turned short. It didn't really go anywhere. I don't think she truly saw my point. I was not trying to be facetious or whatever. It was a genuine question, and I was hoping to have this good discussion. She's a linguist. She's supposed to be able to come up with some interesting answers. That's not what I got in this case, but I still to this day remember this conversation, and I still very much feel like asking this question. That is my first story about this. So Xindi and Devin, where do you go from there? Do you want to start giving pointers, or what? Where do we go from there?
So we had some questions, comments on. We've been thinking about this story for a couple days now, and one of how do I say this? In one way, this sounds exactly like being tattooed, and I mean it in this way. In our class, we've been speaking a lot about uniforms and the idea of a uniform. And the idea of a uniform is, in some way, to automate the choice of what to wear every day. If you have 5 black shirts and 5 black suits, you're choosing not to choose, in a sense. And of course, I think in a very relatable way, then tattooing seems like automating a choice to wear the same thing every day. You're choosing once, and after this, well, you don't have to think about it anymore. You have to think about being tattooed, but the choice is already made. And so one of the things I was wondering if you had anything to say about, Max, was about habit in this instance. It seems that what makes this person, how do I say this? What makes this person the look the same for years? What makes this person actually pretty much timeless is this relationship to habit. She's chosen once, and she's found some way to automate this choice so that it becomes something she doesn't have to negotiate every day. So I was wondering if you had something on this topic, tattooing and habit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, one part of the way, a way to look at the situation to answer to answer this, and the question of habit for me points to one thing that is very important in this case, whether it is deliberate. So there can be an a priori decision to not make a decision, which could be, and that is, so for me that this brings yet another question, that is a, so I would like to avoid without, I'd like to avoid the question of whether the choice is made ahead of time or by default, because it poses another question, the sort of rhetoric of the choice. And for me, there's the question of the choice does the choice exist if you never exercise your choice? If you do not ever change something, do you actually have the choice? Does it exist if it's never used? But I don't want to get into this. For me, de facto, you have someone who, even if they have not made the choice ahead of time, they have not necessarily made the choice to not make the choice. They have not used the choice. Clearly, they have. We can verify the result of not making the choice to change, not making the decision to change one day, change the color of their hair, put a wig on. That never happened. So de facto, the choice was never made to change, and it is very, very reasonable to imagine that there was not a conscious decision every morning to still do this, and a thorough internal debate on whether that was the day to completely change their appearance. So there's a point where it is a habit, where it is something that is not questioned. If it is not questioned, again, what is the difference? That there might not be a difference. In one case, you have removed it beforehand. In another scenario, and again, that there could be a debate whether it exists or not, but de facto you're not using it, so the result is the same. So we can only question not the result but the intention, and that's a slippery slope. But so I think it questions the idea of free will, and essentially at what point does free will, and what for? And that's another thing. What does free will need to be used for? Is appearance something that it needs to be used for? We only have, free will takes time. Free will does not, it takes time. We need to choose what we use our power of decision for. And one can decide to not use it for their appearance. That can be one motivation. There's other motivations, that there's statements that can be made through there as well. But the question is, I think the question is the question of if there's a decision or not. What is the decision? What does it mean about oneself? Or what does it mean for a person to and for me, I don't want to now get into an attack of that person. It's not really the point, but maybe there is a little bit of point there. Isn't there also extremely questionable, if not problematic, in someone who is ready to reject someone else's decision to my decision at that point, whatever it might be, who is ready to not respect my decision while they are effectively not using theirs or creating a false narrative on free will and decision as far as their own situation is concerned. So essentially telling me I still choose the way I look when it's not the case. Clearly, they don't. They look the same all the time, but they are telling me that they do. And for me, this is interesting because it brings yet another subject, which is the question of the agency of the body and the control, the expectation or the fear, clearly in this case, the anxiety of the question of modifying the body, intervening on the body, and the fact that this person never bat an eye. Would if I said, "Oh, I'm gonna dye my hair tomorrow," they would have been like, "Good for you, just go dye your hair, just like I did." But in this case, there was probably, I don't want to say clearly, in my opinion, clearly, but most likely also a cultural generational thing where, so for me, the last aspect that's quite interesting in this is essentially the progression on a scale from a supposed and debatable, that's a different debate maybe for today as well, question of the inside being one end of a spectrum. So whatever the inside is, can be debated, towards the outside that is controlled socially, that is the group that belongs to the group. So the sort of scale from the individual, the inside, also two notions that might need to be separated, but we can't put them on the same spectrum for now. So the inside, the individual, and the group. And essentially the question of at what point on that scale does the decision making of the individual, where is it acceptable? Is it acceptable on the surface of the body, on top of the surface of the body with the clothes? 100 years ago, someone might have told you, no, it's not. The clothes you're wearing, that is not acceptable either. This has to respect certain codes, etc. Your hair, clearly there's cultural contexts where the question of haircut, of dressing are extremely currently today crucial points of power struggle and symbolic struggle. But it could be even beyond, like behaviors, other things that don't have even to do. And as we can see, like, everyday behaviors can be controlled or attempted to be controlled, etc. So I think the last important thing for me that it poses is this question of this scale and the spectrum from inside to outside, and where the decision is acceptable to be made, and how we can negotiate essentially or fight or make the decision to change the point where the decision can be is acceptable to be made. So I think that's pretty much the few points that I think this situation raises, and yeah, that's how I look at it. And again, as I said earlier, I think it applies to a lot of other situations today as well.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Maxime. I really like this idea of the accident that sort of tattooing is supposed to be, because we don't normally think of tattooing as accidental in any sense, right? I like this idea of the accident that happens first, or the sense of like contingency that happens first, because we talked about this in class, right? Like you don't get to choose your face in a certain sense, and you have to live your whole life like this. But in tattooing, it seems like a strange exercise because it appears like it's the contingency you choose, right? But then you have to live with it. And so, oftentimes people regret their tattoos or get them covered up or something like this. But in any case, there's this sense of, oh, even if you do get it covered up, it's a sense of writing on top of writing, right? So there's something underneath. So I want to talk about this idea of something being lived like this, because it's quite different than clothing, I think, in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Max, could I add to this? Actually, I had a question about age too that I think is related. So when you told this story the first time, I was thinking about how tattooing does seem analogous to what this person is doing. But then I was stuck on one of your phrases, which was that you called her something like timeless or ageless, to say that she always looks the same. Tattooing is kind of unlike this in that your tattoos age with you. And so what Cindy's saying about you don't get to choose your face, but you do get to choose this moment of being tattooed. Well, this also relates to the fact that you have to live with it for the rest of your life. So I was wondering about this difference. This person is able to kind of create a habit or automate this, choosing or not, but looks the same 30 years down the line. Tattooing is not necessarily like this. Tattooing is something that ages with you, accumulates on your body. So I was wondering if you had some thoughts on this too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's really interesting because it speaks to another another subject we did discuss as well, which I don't know if it's really, I mean, it could be probably a whole class only on this, on the aspect of the existence of the tattoos, like what is the existence of the tattoos outside of the body once they have been done, and the question of the incidence on the question of intellectual property and things like this. I think it's very interesting because if the preconception is that tattoos do exist, do continue to exist in even after they've been executed, that there's this sort of idea that the body can still be separated from the image that the tattoo is, which is, in my opinion, wrong, but it cannot be entirely wrong, because if it is, if it's perceived as such, maybe it is to an extent, but I don't think I think it's equally wrong to say that it is, that it's not. It's not one or the other. It can be. It depends, but it's wrong to think that there's only one simple sort of factual truth or phenomenological truth, which is that the tattoos remain separated and separatable. I don't know if that's from the body, because Devin, to your point, if tattoos are, they remain this image that is perceived separately, then as such they become a screen over the body, and as such they can effectively interfere with the perception of the body, the same way adjusting your clothes or your hair can, because ultimately, yes, there's something very timeless where an outfit can be adjusted, and you can dye your hair a little more because you're getting gray hair, and you can touch up tattoos to an extent, but ultimately you'll still get a certain amount of wrinkles, a certain amount of things that will give away your age, or your posture will give it away. So I think it's equally wrong. I did say that as an argument, as a way to emphasize my point, but not really. But I think we're looking at two similar situations again, because in both cases, and this is where ultimately, interestingly, to my original point to this person, what she is doing is much more of a negation, that there is something where she's going farther in denying time passing, etc., than what tattoos do, because of her misconception on tattoos, of course. But de facto, I do know that in fact it's the opposite of what she's describing, and what you're saying essentially, that tattoos do age with you, but the preconception on tattoos is this sort of addition where the two don't become one, to quote the Spice Girls, but where the two stay two, and they overlap without this sort of the sort of unification, or simply the updating of the likeness of the body image. So anyway, I think that it is interesting, and I think that the point ultimately is that for me, getting tattooed was always the opposite, and maybe to sort of come out, if we want to get to the next point, but to also bring a bit of a personal sort of conclusion to this. So it's not nowhere near a conclusion, but for me, getting tattooed is very much the opposite. It's very much embracing time passing, very much embracing the weirdness, and the fact that we make choices that we continue to have to deal with our entire life, and essentially that we every day, or if not every day, very frequently make life-changing, life-altering decisions that we do need to deal with. And I personally grew up always resenting or feeling strongly against the temptation of pretending you didn't make the choice, not living up to yeah, like, you know, in everyday things, from the things people say that engage them into a plan or anything, and people sort of not living up to what they say, or the discourse of not assuming one's actions always bothered me as a kid. And for me, tattooing have this tangibility, where it's like, yes, I made that decision at some point, now it's still there. As such, it's not, I cannot blame it on anyone else, really. I just really came to this alone, and made it happen, and now I have to live with it. And I always felt there was something very, very important in remembering this, and not being tempted to rewrite history, to pretend certain things didn't happen, some decisions weren't made. And that is very much how I approached myself getting tattooed from the very beginning. And I will even say that it still informs the way I tattoo other people today, where I absolutely refuse someone, for the most part, to, except for very, very specific exceptions, but if a person comes to get tattooed by me, I do not want anyone else in the room. I don't want a partner. I don't want, this has no place in that decision making, because it defeats the purpose of tattooing, and it has nothing to do with the person, with the how genuinely committed to their life partner they might be, etc. Nothing to do with that. It has to do with what tattooing in a much grander scheme of things, as far as I am concerned, at least. So yeah, That's how I approach it.
I feel like the students are taking notes right now, being like, this is how I will justify getting a tattoo to my parents. So thanks for that.
Yeah, we're giving them ammo. Max, I mean, I have some more questions, but I think I'll defer them. We can maybe go to another story and then just cycle things back in where they're relevant. What do you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you want to go? Do you want me to go, Cindy?
Well,
Okay. So yeah.
I'm taking notes as well. I think at some point maybe we could just, if you think that's relevant, the specific example of the legal issues with intellectual property and how it applies to especially in America to video games and athletes and stuff like that, I think would be quite an interesting practical example of misconceptions on tattooing or these, but we can maybe bring that back at the end.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We told our students about that example explicitly in class, so I think they will have some
nice
to say about this too. So I titled my story, and it needs a bunch of disclaimers so I don't get fired. So the story is titled "Swastikas Everywhere," and essentially this happened around the time that Donald Trump was elected in the U.S. I was doing my PhD in the U.S. At this time, and on the news, at least in America, there were all of these very kind of sensationalist stories about white supremacists and grassroots white supremacist movements. They're not false, but really this became a concern for the whole country when it was happening in a few places, mostly in the South of America. Okay, so at this time, I still had tattoos, just a couple years ago, and I was walking in Boston. So this is kind of two stories, but I'm going to consolidate them. So forgive the kind of what's the word for that narrator's privilege here. The first one was essentially this. I was my car was out of gasoline. I was running, wearing shorts, summer, running to get some gasoline, and I'm carrying a jerry can, like a can that you would carry gasoline in. Yeah, that's or commit arson with. And so I'm carrying this, and I have a shaved head at the time. And as I think is obvious, my head is also tattooed. So I'm going on a run with my jerry can to the gas station. I get to the gas station, and I'm filling up my jerry can, and a car stops. And the guy gets out of the car and looks at my leg tattoos, which, yeah, visible in the shorts. My leg tattoos are of waves, just waves. Nothing crazy, no swastikas. So the disclaimer I have to say is that I don't have a swastika tattoo. All right. So keeping my job for another day. So I have these wave tattoos on my legs, and the guy looks at these and he says, "I know what those mean." And I say, "They are waves." and he asks me what I'm doing essentially in the neighborhood which I live in. And then he says again, "I know what those mean." And I say, they're just wave tattoos. And he says, "Those are Nazi tattoos. They're Japanese waves." Another experience like this, and then I'll tell you the moral to this story. So I'm at a bus stop, also in Boston, also around the same period. I also have tattoos in this story. Someone stops me and points to the back of my head, and I don't hear them. I'm have my headphones in or whatever, and I'm continuing to walk to the bus. They grab me and physically turn me around and ask me why I have swastika tattoos on the back of my head. Disclaimer: I don't have swastika tattoos on the back of my head. And even more ironically, these were you could accuse me of cultural appropriation. These are Haitian veve symbols, so really nothing to do with the swastika whatsoever. But in this moment, and here's kind of the moral of this story. In both instances, I started to explain myself. And the interesting thing was that the explanation, which I'm sure some of you can relate to, was not just about the meaning of the tattoos. It was about what they literally were, like the physical objects, which had been misrecognized: waves, snakes. And I realized the futility of this gesture. As I said, I don't literally have the tattoos that these people thought I did, but also for a moment, at least semiotically, I didn't get to have the last word on this situation. It was pointless to debate about this, and so in a sense, they were right, and they were right for at least for me an interesting reason, namely. When I realized that when I was getting tattooed, I was putting myself in a situation or repeating a situation that I was already essentially in anyways as a body in public. That is, I didn't have the last word on. I didn't have the final say on the meanings that were projected on, attributed to my body, nor to my tattoos. And this is, of course, not just about what the tattoos meant. It's about what the tattoos physically were. And so I thought this would be an interesting point of discussion too, that tattooing is not exceptional in this instance, but it does appear to be a strange kind of repetition of a situation that we're all in anyways, tattooed or not. So I was wondering if Xindi, Maxime, you had thoughts on this.
Cindy, do you want to go on?
Please, you're the guest. They want to hear you talk.
Yeah, they hear us all the time.
Yeah, they're sick of us.
So yeah, I think it's fascinating, and it's things that I feel a lot of tattooed people will recognize, but much more importantly, it is what a lot of not tattooed people and minorities in particular have to endure without having had any say on who, how, where they were born. We have a say on what we put as tattoos on ourselves. But I think it's a very important reminder of what you're describing in terms of what we put out, and the fact that it will be interpreted and read and reacted towards however we feel about it. And for me it is the same. It sort of ties back in with the end of the previous story, where I think it's a very interesting reminder, as in particular Western white males in a Western context, where we can make the decision. It's still very much a privilege to put ourselves through this consciously. We still have the choice to a large extent, and let us remember that it's merely a very, very suggestion of what minorities have to experience on a very, very regular basis. And I think especially, Devin, as you saw yourself, someone felt all of a sudden allowed to grab you, and to have behaviors towards you that are not actually not acceptable. And that is very much what people who are not tall white male have to endure. So first of all, I think it's very important to see this, and to absolutely keep this in mind. For me, there's another thing that it raises other questions that I find really interesting, which is a couple of things, the notions such as incorporation bias. There's this sort of but which is also related to another thing, which is the reflex, and whether it is culturally conditioned. And my opinion is that it would be interesting, at least I think it's probably to some extent culturally conditioned, and it would be interesting to understand if it might not happen in other cultural contexts, because we exist in a mostly dominantly Christian, culturally Christian environment, that even though obviously they were movements trying to change this in Protestantism, etc., but where symbolism, figuration, and the symbolism underlying is extremely important, and where images are constantly, have been historically constantly used as sort of Trojan horses for messages and etc. So and reversely, abstraction, decoration, ornament, the non-signification is not really present in our culture, and it's something that is not expected. Where I would ask a question, and I'm curious, is maybe it is in other cultures. I could totally imagine contexts where a person does not by default assume that there is a meaning under a shape, an artificial shape. So that is for me something quite important. Sorry, I don't know what to do with the sun. Let me just try to take that line down. Okay.
Yeah,
No.
yeah, good.
Oh, perfect angle. Oh yeah, there we go. So for me, there's this there's the question of why do we feel compelled, like so compelled to like we cannot accept the idea, and because I've had similar things, like I have tattoos on my head that are inspired by certain shapes, but that have no meaning, that I made the decision to remove any meaning from, and the same, like people ask me what it means, and I can see how they refuse. They think I'm gaslighting them if I say it doesn't mean anything, and that is very interesting. And there was, let me just check my notes real quick. So I think that there is this aspect, but also, and I want to say, like, Devin, the first time you told me your story, I didn't quite remember, or I don't know if you didn't mention, but I didn't remember the context and the Trump context, etc. What I find interesting as well is whether they could be on top of that, something that is heightened there with a certain context where of pressure and danger potentially, where reading signs, and especially in relation to a context that can be physically dangerous, of proto-fascism, if not a form of fascism in America, and the fact that some people might feel that being able to recognize signs that would be of fascism, and a person that it could be involved in it, it is also part of a survival reflex, and something that is definitely where what I was talking about earlier, the sort of need and reflex or compulsion to read things, especially if they are artificial, human made, then in this context in particular, it takes a whole other level and meaning or amplitude, due to a very specific context where the need to recognize a person who could be danger, or I don't know, maybe you're talking to maybe the person who's stopping you with your gas tank, is a white supremacist, and is trying to see if you're one of theirs. But it can be, I have a shaved head. I have to do I have to do a lot to ensure, as much as I can, to not be perceived as that. Every day I have to make decisions, conscious decisions for this purpose, not about my tattoos, obviously, but about how do I not come across as a skinhead or whatever. So so I think there could be a context that even brings this out more. So yeah, that's a few thoughts on it.
Thanks.
Thank you. I really like this thing that I think you and Devin have both said, which is my tattoos have no meaning. And I find this statement very interesting, right? Because you mean they have no meaning to you. There's no meaning in it when you first got them. But I think what's interesting about this statement is that there's an overdetermination of meaning for others, as we know from the story, right? So what I like about this is that it means that your tattoos don't seem to belong to you anymore in this context. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, yourself and your body as a surface for inscription. We talked a little bit about this yesterday, right? When we talked about modeling, because we said models are always a surface for projection. But I think what's specific to tattooing is that here you become a surface for projection based on you being inscribed in a certain sense, right? And so now when you get tattooed, you are made into a cultural ambassador of tattooed people in general, right? And so this happens, I mean, you were talking a little bit about this, Maxime, but you're saying this happens racially too. I mean, when people meet me, they think I'm like the cultural ambassador for China or something like this, right? So I wanted to talk a little bit about this like idea of overdetermination of meaning and this idea that your body actually doesn't belong to you in a certain context, and you are sort of hyper realizing this when you're getting a tattoo.
Max, if you want to jump in, that's okay. I also I have some things to say here too. What do you,
Go ahead. I'm thinking.
yeah, thinking. Okay, well, think on my time. So Cindy, I think this is exactly right. There's a question of ownership here. One of the things I want to bring in from the class, and this is me plagiarizing, well, actually citing Anastasia Skatskaya, who had this important distinction. We're talking about self-writing and ways of representing the self. And Anastasia asked this or posed this question actually of me versus my. That when we're often trying to talk about me, we do it on the basis of my. So going back to your story, this person who appears to be timeless is timeless precisely because of the things that they have power over, things they can change. They dye their hair, they wear the same clothes, they have the same glasses. This me, which seems to be timeless, which doesn't seem to age, is entirely predicated on the my in this instance. And I thought that tattooing was quite relevant in that sense, based on what Cindy is saying. This thing that is supposed to define me, I am an ambassador of tattooing in Tyumen, Siberia, is also not mine, as we can see from the story.
Yeah, for me, at least the conclusion I have come to, like an operational conclusion I've come to in relation to all the similar experiences I've had, is that ultimately I might I might have not realized that getting into, as I was getting tattooed, I probably did not quite realize what it would entail, or how it would essentially emphasize this aspect of people thinking they're allowed to touch you, etc. I think it's very important to recognize for myself that it the absence of awareness of that comes from a place of privilege, because I did not experience that previously, or not to the same, not to the same extent that many other people do experience it. And I consider still that the ability to make a choice, to have made the choice to put myself in this situation, is still a privilege in itself, even though it doesn't feel like one when people are encroach or bypass the social norms to come touch you or address you in ways that they're not supposed to. But what I think is important is to use this as, and what I try to remind myself, and what you understand you try to do as well, is that we, again, as people who wants the dialogue, even if it might come on in the form of a not an aggression necessarily, but definitely trespassing a private space or moment, you know, by addressing a tattooed person or whatever. I personally take it as I find it that there's a sort of moral duty I have to engage and to try my best to not just be antagonizing the person, but take the opportunity in the situation of privilege that I have to convey why it wouldn't be okay, and why if it's not okay for me, it's even less okay for people who didn't choose how it could say something about what is acceptable or not acceptable in terms of intervening, touching other people's bodies, or even giving up. I think ultimately there is something very interesting with refusing, being proactive at refusing meaning, and ultimately it's ultimately a way to say, look, like, don't worry about others, like don't try to maybe it's a time in history where everyone should only, you know, focus on what's directly around them, not only themselves, but not on strangers. Like we're in a situation in 2023 where one cannot anymore safely assume that what is valid for them is valid for others, even in terms of simply reading what their bodies, what their presence might mean, what their intentions might be. And ultimately, look, like, I did this in a way to demonstrate how you cannot do that, how you can defeat the people's compulsion to project their own reading, their own canons of interpretation on you. And look, this is me defeating it because you're seeing this. But yes, you can see a swastika if you really want to, but if you find this, like, yes, it can be a Rorschach test and you can see it there, but it still doesn't mean that what if I had put a swastika on myself, it would mean something about me. It would be a signifier for something else. You can still see the swastika if you really, really want, but it doesn't change the fact that it doesn't mean it is not the signifier for what you want it to be a signifier of, which is that I'm not a Nazi. I'm not, you know, what you want me to become part of. So I think there's something extremely political and important in making that effort in defeating this pressure of categorizing bodies.
Thanks, Max. So I think next I have one relatively short thing to say about this, and then Xindi is going to tell third and final story. Does that sound good?
Oh, excellent.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked about ornaments, and we've talked about refusing meaning and this compulsion to mean, and we've also talked about being ambassadors of certain things, which is of course related to stereotype in different ways. One of the flip sides of this idea of meaning, or this compulsion to mean, is also that you can answer a question before it's been asked. This is something we've discussed in our class in terms of this idea of the wink. Essentially, if I, well, how I'm read now as someone who's extensively tattooed is as a tattooed person. I basically answer, what is this person? before that question is asked. And this can be a statement as much as a non-statement, in the sense that once you answer that, people stop asking further questions. No one needs to figure me out anymore. That's a guy with tattoos. I can give you an easy example of this. If I wanted, I think if I wanted to create a very famous TikTok account, what I could do is brand myself as the tattooed professor, and I would simply have tattoos, and that would answer the question of who I am, and I would give like 30-second sentences about media studies and philosophy of technology. So there's a way in which this compulsion to mean can also be played with. Trigger that compulsion, answer that compulsion, and you end up as an ornament. You have a meaning, but it's a superficial one. It allows you to do other things, such as make a famous TikTok account. Yeah. All right, Cindy, you want to?
Okay, this story is kind of cringe, but so sorry about that in advance. It's called I Didn't Know That's What I Wanted, and I want it to basically be a parable about translation as negotiation. So, okay, when I was a teenager, I wanted to get a tattoo, and it was my first tattoo. And I was really, really invested in the meaning of this tattoo and the lore behind it. And obviously I had an image in my head of what I wanted. Side note, it's still the biggest tattoo I have. So I was very serious about this. So yeah, I had an image in my head that I wanted to Miles, the tattoo artist I chose, who I continued to go to because he has a really specific style. So yeah, he had his idea of the tattoo that I realized was an interpretation of the idea that I had. But he clearly, like, when I, probably went on and on about what the meaning of this tattoo was, he probably like didn't care, right? So in this case, it was both a problem and a promise, which we talked about in our class. It's a problem because of how tattooing becomes translated, not just from words to image, but from something two-dimensional into something three-dimensional that is lived on the body, right? So even though the tattoo wasn't what I imagined, it became a promise that I had to live up to and endure. And I obviously really love this tattoo. But yeah, so this is why I think we should talk about a little bit about translation from person to person, from words to image and style, and also from the two-dimensional to the three-dimensional as the paradox of the problem and promise of getting a tattoo. And I think, Maxime, you talked about this in the sense of, tattoos never being perfect, right? So yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about.
So for me, what is really interesting here is there's an overarching question, which is sort of almost a linguistics or philosophy of linguistics, and then there's something that it speaks. This is in this whole conference we're having. I think this speaks the most of also my practice as a tattoo artist myself. So it's quite interesting in that sense, and I'll bring some perspective on how I approach it. One thing that I find interesting is also there could be an interesting differentiation or discussion on the differentiation between encryption and translation or symbolism. What you're making, for me, you're saying two things. One thing, and even in the words you chose, there's one part where you say what the tattoo means, and which is one thing. Who does it mean it to? Like, that is the question. Encryption is interesting because ultimately you need a key for encryption, for decryption. A dot can mean an infinite amount of things if you've agreed with the person who sees it on what it means. So for me, it poses the question of who are you talking to and what kind of common frame of reference to decipher, or is it a prompt? Is it simply a reminder of a signification that you are already aware of? And that is different from a space or sign that contains the description within itself. So that would contain in, well, if there can be such a thing, that's another debate, but non-equivocal or fairly universal terms, letters or whatever language, the a certain amount of ideas and things that want to be transmitted. And so for me, this is the first extremely interesting question, because as a tattooist, I don't care what it means to the person or to the person who needs to see it, to the bestie of the person who comes to get tattooed. That is not my problem. What my problem is A, to ensure that the tattoo does meet the criteria to be recognized as such, and two, that if they are elements that exist or should be decipherable beyond this specific bubble or like of the people involved, then and specifically things that and that speaks yet to, for me, certain aspects of morals, cultural appropriation, etc., in the practice of tattooing. Myself, if there's a certain amount of things that needs to be encrypted entirely within the piece itself, according to a language that I am privy of, then it is my responsibility to ensure that it is done correctly. So what is interesting is when I started tattooing, I was apprenticing with people who worked in quote unquote Asian or Asian inspired styles. I realized very quickly that I could not find any interest in doing this. At that point, it was not even, I did not necessarily have the distance, the critical distance to understand, to really nail, to really put my finger on what cultural appropriation is and all those aspects that came a bit later. But I already had a sense that there was something deeply contradictory with what I perceived was my duty as a tattooist, if I tried to produce motifs that used codes, aesthetic, symbolic codes that I just didn't know, that are not part of my culture, and I realized how on the other hand, how free I felt, and how efficient and adequate I felt dealing with iconography and symbolism that directly belonged to my culture. In this case, I was apprenticing in Switzerland, so it is effectively historically European Christian iconography, which, by the way, poses yet another and a whole other question that I think would be very interesting, which is the question of the need to proactively address and untangle religious the religious aspects of European Western iconographic history and culture from what is not religious per se, because religion historically is like it's like a medium. It's like, you know, it's like that pill that you buy, you know, that has liquid in it, you know, your little Advil or you know, painkiller you get. And you know, that there's historically until pretty much the 18th century, but everything is religious, not because it's the point, but because it is the liquid that everything is diluted within, and it's important to be able to separate the messages from the what carried it. And as Western people, as a European person myself, however I feel about the history of Europe and its heritage, it is mine, and it's for me to deal with it, and I have a moral duty to address it, because as much as I can despise and regret a lot of it, I also directly profit of all the nasty and somber aspects of European history. Anyway, so but back to the question of being able to produce things. I think as a tattoo artist, you need first to differentiate and separate what can I convey, what can I include in the design, and what belongs specifically to a frame of reference that I'm not part of, and that should not be part of, that would be wrong for me to try and intervene in or pronounce myself on. And I think yeah, that's for me the first very important aspect. And I think it applies to arts in general and to fashion as well, very much. The question of to what extent are those things signs that can be read, and to what extent. And then for me, let me just look at my notes quickly. But for me, it's yeah, we can be we can bring back things to the question of the inside and the outside. I think Xindi, you suggested the terms of translation and negotiation. I think we again, what I'm sort of, there is a sense of inside to outside. In actually, I realize in what I was just talking about, between one singular individual, a small group of individual, and a society. There is obviously a scale like that. For me, what I think is interesting as well, I just want to point to this, but the idea of translation implies the idea that there is an object that exists in itself, and that needs to be translated. Is any, the other day I mentioned that when you speak several languages, do you translate from one language to another, or do you, or if you're going to express something in one language and then the next, what do you keep in each language? Do you try to translate from language A to language B, or is there a sort of zero object that is translated or expressed into language A or language B, and with no difference? The idea that there is, and this is one thing that for me, I don't want to make everything sort of, I don't know what the term is, relativiser. I don't want to relativize everything, but for me, there's something very interesting in the idea that maybe there isn't, like, is there an object beyond the expression of the object, or is the object constituted as it is expressed. And if it is expressed with someone else, then it becomes a thing as it is expressed. For me, that's very important. Because the question of, because the other way around, on the one hand, we can sort of celebrate the idea of a sort of pure idea that needs to be translated, and where we can constantly judge the quality of translation. But also it means that it constantly brings back to the person who expresses. It bypasses a collective responsibility in the expression of the thing. It only keeps the individual responsibility, whether the person who expresses it to the tattooist or in any context. It's like, oh, you've poorly expressed yourself. Now the word is going to shit. It's your fault. But maybe it's not your fault. Maybe you expressed yourself perfectly well. Maybe it is the fault of everyone who didn't understand. All of this, none of those statements are correct. None of those statements are valid, because in my opinion, there isn't really any object before it is expressed. And I will give a little example. You have apple slice. You've sliced an apple into slices. You have apple slices. You have a certain amount. That's great. You cannot deny the existence of apple slices. But before you sliced the apple, how many apple slices were there? Are there 20, 2, 4 in the apple? There's any amount until you do it. And once you've done it, you have your answer. But any answer is valid until it's done.
We're forbidding analytic philosophy questions in this class. Just kidding. So
anyway, for me, the tattoo is this: is there a tattoo that can be judged? Can the result you get when you get tattooed be judged in relation to the idea that there was something before that could be an étalon, like a benchmark, something that it could be judged in relation to? Do you see what I'm saying? Or does it not exist? It simply doesn't exist until it's done.
yeah, we talked extensively in this course with the students about this idea of untranslatability, right? This idea of untranslatability between certain idioms, because you would never, if you wanted to translate an idiom, you wouldn't, would you translate it literally, or would you, try to preserve something about the general meaning of it, right? And so I think you're absolutely right. There's a sense of like encryption in every single tattoo, right? And it doesn't need to be decoded. It could be your own sort of personal secret in this sense or whatever, right? I wanted to go back a little bit though, because I have a very quick point. I'm going to talk, Devin's going to talk, and then we're going to open it up to the students. And I promise these points are quick. So, I wanted to go back to this question of authenticity in tattooing, because I noticed that like when we, when we want to be really respectful, and I think this is absolutely correct to do so, what is like my culture supposed to be, right? Because like, for example, like does American culture belong to me because my passport? What is my culture supposed to be, right? And so, for example, like if Devin actually did have a swastika tattoo, but the meaning it's because he loves India or something, right? He would still get the shit beat out of him because he had that tattoo, even if he's like the meaning is actually, it goes back to Indian culture or something like this, right? And so like I think authenticity becomes really questionable because it comes to be about like this current moment, right? What the current moment thinks of a certain culture is supposed to be, rather than doing any sort of historiography or historicism. And even if you do, how far back do you want to go, right? Do you want to go back like 300 years? Do you want to go back 2000 years kind of thing? So I really think that like my culture here becomes super questionable until people impose it on you, right? So my culture is never my own culture in this sense. It is what people are asking you to be a cultural ambassador of still. So yeah.
I'm sorry, just may I just there was just something I wanted to say on the previous subject. For me, there's one way to essentially, again, to not to go from like super abstract considerations to very concrete. People ask me, oh, like that's a question you get all the time. Hey, what if you make a mistake in the tattoo? And what is a mistake? Essentially, there can only be a mistake if there was an expectation. For me, as far, and again, that there's something that is very important in the practice of tattooing, because I expose myself to issues and possibly what's the word, like faults. I can negotiate before the negotiation is in the expectation. Essentially, if I don't tell the person exactly where a line will be, I might know where I want the line to be, but if it's somewhere else, is it a mistake? I don't know. Like maybe it's not a mistake. Maybe it is just what it is. I know where the line starts and where it ends. I can pretty much control that. But if there's a bump in between, then maybe I wanted the bump. So I think ultimately what I find really interesting in the process of agreeing on the boundaries of, like, the negotiation is in the boundaries within which we will let things happen with no control. And there is something extremely also beautiful about this, where you're setting yourself for failure if you let at any point yourself or your client believe that you can control everything. But there's also something really beautiful in the act of tattooing or getting tattooed, in letting go of that. And for me, the question is, well, shouldn't be there isn't there something to also to embrace in other contexts of life? I think we're coming back again to the to reading signs in the tattoos, etc. It isn't there also something beautiful at some point, and to be encouraged to just accept that most things in life, in fact, are not controlled. They're not right or wrong. They just are that, and that the amount of actual meaning, actual information conveyed at any point is very, very minimal. Even in verbal communication, for the matter. And so I think the negotiation what is very interesting as a tattoo artist is to decide that, and for example, throughout my own practice, I have in fact pushed progressively my practice to allow me to grow the limits within which I will essentially let things happen. I might have a little more control than my client, of course, but there's a certain amount of things I'm not trying to control. I pretty much set up how it's going to begin, but I don't know exactly how it's going to end. And there, I find something extremely poetic and very beautiful about this in general as an experience, that I personally enjoy every day. And I think that tattoos are better understood and enjoyed like this, because ultimately, and not to be facetious, but just as a sort of extreme example, if someone wants to really convey something and wants to explain it with words, then let's write words. At that point, you have a non-equivocal possibility to translate directly your verbs into your words, your verbal expression into verbal expression that can be deciphered pretty much unequivocally. You do have that option. If you agree to not take that option, then you agree for a certain amount of wiggle room there. And yeah, so like ultimately tattoos need to be embraced as a dialogue, as conversation starters, because again, you have the choice to not tattoo yourself, and then you're removing that aspect if you want, or you can put them in completely hidden places. So anyway, so sorry, I just wanted to finish on that. I think the Gestalt aspect of tattoos is very interesting, because it's directly something that I have to do every day, and that I have done on the scale of an entire career. That was it.
Max, so I'm making some intense eye contact with the students. Do you have time for some questions, comments? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we shift to that? I mean, there's 1,000 more things that we could talk about. Let's see if we can get some of those in the questions. So we'll do online questions, we'll do physical questions, and we'll just alternate. Yeah. Yes, and by the way, for those of you here physically, we started slightly late. We'll run it slightly late. If you absolutely have to leave, no one's blocking the door. But stay, ask some questions, learn some things.
It wouldn't close. Hey, I'm a fashion and philosophy student, and I really hope that I won't steal too much time with my question. But I just can't avoid it, because we started our discussion with the discussion of choice and agency in tattooing, but one of the topics that was brought up is permanence in tattooing. And it seems that permanence assumed to be definitive to tattooing, both in our discussion and in general in the discourse around tattoos. And maybe one way to try this assumption is to subvert it. And then my question is there anything temporary about tattoos? What is it, if it is? Oh, you can.
Yeah, I also had two questions that are related to Nadia's question, so I think it's better if I do it right now. So my question, so I wanted to ask my question, then explain why I asked the question. So yeah, that's how I will join Nadia. So my question was, what actually makes a tattoo? And the reason I ask is that today we talked about the choice and in a way the fate, for example, or something like this. And also we've read some of your interviews before today. And yeah, so you said one time in one of the interview for Russian journal or something like this, you said that tattoo for you are not really about design, it's about this moment of life of your life where you met the tattoo artist, stuff like this. So yeah, it seems like the tattoo is also about this trace of your life or something like this. But then I think in the recent years we've got this idea of temporary tattoos. For example, this summer in Russia on the internet, there were all over these videos with tattoos that exist only for 2 years. So then, in the sense, what happens with tattoo if it is about to disappear? And that's how also my question of what makes a tattoo goes back to Nadia's question. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's it's interesting. It's like, you know, why for me the question of ultimately I sort of refuse to think in the terms of permanent, not permanent. Like part of my point as well is part of my personal stance is that it's not really relevant because it can be whatever you want. You can cover it and it's gone, or you can laser. It doesn't matter. What matters is what you do, what you have put in making it happen, and the fact that is, yes, it can be removed or it can fade or whatever, but it's harder than other things. It's harder than dyeing your hair. It happens on a different time scale, and it will fade over time. If you do a very small tattoo or use a light gray, it might fade to the point that it's almost not visible. Once it's not visible or it's not seen, is it still there or is it not? Like, who knows? Like, what is it not being there? Like, once it's not recognized, maybe it's not there anymore. Like, so for me, it's less, that is really that for me, it's a bit of a non-problem. It's a non-debate in that sense. What is interesting is to me the question of the temporary tattoos, the things that fade. Why would anyone put themselves through how the process of getting a tattoo is annoying? It's painful, even if it's not extremely painful. It's, I have clients who use numbing cream. Even then, it's annoying. They have to sit for a long time. They have to wait. It doesn't always work. Why? What kind of sense does it make to not do this, to have it forever? It completely defeats the purpose. It's completely pointless. You can draw every day, draw the thing on you, do a decal or whatever. For me, it's very interesting, but ultimately, I maybe naively, but I do believe that there's, there was a company that was doing those fading tattoos. As far as I'm concerned, that it's nowhere to be seen today. I think it's defunct at this point, or pretty much. I mean, I knew it. It doesn't make any sense. Like it's like baking for hours, but not being able to eat what you baked. Do you know what I mean? It's so. The other way around, why not? Getting the result without getting the process, sure, why not? We can change on that, but the whole point of the tattoo is that it's permanent. So I think it's kind of a non-issue in that sense, but it is interesting. It's interesting that it exists, and I have to add to this. What is very interesting to me is, as a person who's been observing the tattoo industry for 20 years, I see projects like this are almost always initiated by people who have nothing to do with tattooing and who don't understand what tattooing is about, and come with those genius ideas that, sometimes they raise ridiculous amounts of money for, by the way, which is very depressing to a person who's in the industry and who can see the amount of good that getting large investments could do to improving the materials we work with, like the tools we work with, all of that, professionalize the practice, etc. But you have those people who come with their genius ideas, and they're like, okay, why do you think, like, people have been on the moon for 60 years. In 2023, if no one is using a fading ink by this point in time, is not because no one figured it out. It's because it doesn't make any sense. There's a lot of things that don't exist, not because no one's ever thought about it, but just because it doesn't make any sense, and it's pointless. So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
Hello. I sincerely apologize if you have already talked about it. If it is so, please stop me. I'm okay with that. But I want to ask you about originality and artistry. Obviously, if you are a well-regarded artist, people want your design, your tattoos. But I think in general, in most of the cases, people just come to a tattoo artist and they want either something very simple or something they saw on the internet. Again, we don't care about banality, because even something as simple as butterfly wings can be very meaningful to a person. And or for example, I personally want a tattoo of a Matisse painting, which is also replicating something that already exists. So where does it put a tattoo artist? Because many people want them just to be a mechanical worker, a machine, basically.
I think it's a very interesting question, and it is a question that doesn't have. I think again, I don't think there's an binary answer to it. I think it's on a scale, and it's part of a negotiation that happens with the client every time, but with your clientele on the scale of an entire career, and that has to start with your own interest and yeah, your own, what you want, but also knowing that can change over time. And that personally, I'm coming back again to the question of the boundaries, or whoever, there's a point where there's a passing of the torch. There's a letting go of the responsibility, where any artist, even the most photorealistic tattoo artist who will do the replica of the Matisse painting on you, will have to make certain decisions. And those decisions, there isn't such a thing as no decisions. Even if a machine did it, the machine would have been made according to a certain amount of decisions that have been made by humans, or an artificial intelligence that has been made by humans. So I think the question of, again, it's a question of negotiation. Where do you set the boundaries of that freedom, and that agency, that license you get as an artist, and how you define yourself, how the context, obviously, that you put yourself in allows, because ultimately I have dedicated my life, I have made choices on where I live based on what it would mean for my practice of tattooing. And I currently am in the world, in a place that is the most likely to let me do what I do. But also, you can find yourself somewhere where you are free, but where no one wants what you want to do. In such case, you're not making a living of tattooing either. So I think, again, that for me, it reflects to something that was referred to very early in the discussion, which is the preconceptions that we have on art. And in particular, the fact that there's this idea that art can exist as a pure form of expression of an individual that exists in the ether, with no consideration of what others around want to see at a certain point, and no effect of any context in time or space whatsoever, which I think is an absolute farce, and actually an extremely toxic narrative for the individuals who engage in arts, and essentially is then in turn used as a way to control what people produce, and to a large extent leave artists fairly powerless to be exploited in a sort of capitalistic general capitalistic commercial context.
Max, I am gonna make a logistical intervention. How many more people have questions? Can you put your hand up so I can see? Okay, so I think this can end actually organically. Is there anyone on Zoom with a question? And if so, could you use the hands up function just so we can see? No? Good. Okay. So why don't we hear from our last two questioners? We have Demid. Who else was? Demid and Polly. Okay. So yeah, let's go to Demid. Let's end with Polly. You can wrap it up.
Yeah. Hello, Maxime. Thank you very much for really cool insights today. And so I wanted to ask one question. So, I found today one all issue of GQ Style magazine of 2016, I think. And yeah, and there was an interview of Scott Campbell there. So, well, if you know that this is an artist, tattooist, very famous there. And there was an example. There was a picture of his collaboration with Berluti, where his graphics were used for bags, jackets, shoes, and so on. And I wanted to ask you, and I think this is an explicit example where a tattoo, like tattooing, is united with fashion. And I wanted to ask, does it actually reduce the value of tattooing as an independent form of art? Because tattoos are supposed to be on a body, but not on a jacket or the shoes or on a bag. And does it put these different fields in conflict, or does it actually contribute to more like of cooperation?
I think it's a great question. I think what I find interesting is the actual specific context of this collaboration or whatever it is. In French, say anecdotique is just like that. But what is interesting about it is the very, very conscious effort for now, I don't know, solid 30 years maybe, that the world of fashion, starting probably, I want to say, with Jean-Paul Gaultier, maybe someone else did, is it, I don't remember, someone, anyway, but since the 80s or 90s, I think probably early 90s, there has been attempts for the fashion industry, for the fashion culture to interact. I think what the specific example of what you're talking about is for me interesting, because until that point, and I want to credit to some extent Scott for being the first tattooist to have successfully negotiated an interaction between fashion and tattooing. Around the same time, that was around the same time I was doing Semble magazine. I don't want to credit myself too much, but retrospectively, that was probably one of the first serious attempts as well. But as I was not a tattooist at that point, I was more on the side of fashion, if anything, or no, not even really. I was really truly in between. I was not particularly active as in fashion either. But what is interesting is ultimately tattooing went from, and so I would just want to, for the sake of the record, there has to be a differentiation between tattooing as a technique, as an act, and tattooing as a culture. So in this case, I'm talking about the Western culture of tattooing. In a Western context, tattooing went from subculture with people essentially who share a common understanding of the codes, with codes and iconography shared among a group of people who can be deciphered as such, to something that progressively piggybacking or as part of a gentrification of subcultures, sort of post Second World War, the birth of pop culture, and which functions as a process of gentrification of subcultures. Tattooing was part of that. It was later, but it's part of that. And what you're describing, you know, Scott did. I think before that he had done some stuff for he knew Marc Jacobs and had done stuff for Louis Vuitton. And because of his position, he did well. He did well in as himself. I don't think the results that just a signifier of his efforts to make that connection happen, which comes as a response to the need of fashion to stay relevant, or to keep addressing and augment itself as essentially a culture of appearance and the codes thereof, the aesthetics thereof, and the need for fashion to be able to be in a dialogue, if not integrated entirely, but be in a dialogue with other practices that pertain to appearance, jewelry, watchmaking, tattooing, beauty, hair, all of those things, plastic surgery, all of those things have elements of those. And I think it is interesting because it's very slow, and it's slower than I imagined personally. I imagined when I started Semble magazine that by 2023 we would be farther than we are in terms of in the integration and the dialogue between tattooing and fashion and other practices. But anyway, I think it is interesting because it is evolving. It is going in an interesting direction, and I don't think it is diminishing anything. If anything, the only thing that diminishes is, again, the efforts to constantly extract capital from cultural practices or artistic practices. That is what diminishes it. The cultural dialogue between fashion and or arts and tattooing, all those practices, is always fruitful, is always towards more relevance and more and the production of more culture. What diminishes the culture is the effort to transform this into capital that can be extracted for the purpose of material dominance. But that's another thing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Hi. So I'm glad that the question that was bothering me found its place in the context of the dialogue. So the question that I had is, what is the relationship between being in and owning a tattoo? Is it synonymous? Is it antonymous? Is it, like you said today, we spoke a lot about spectrums. Is it a spectrum for you? So what is this relationship between being in and owning or having a tattoo is for you? That's the question.
I'm sorry, what do you mean by being in? Like being a tattooist or being in a tattoo?
Yeah, like being in a tattoo. So identifying yourself via tattoo, via having a tattoo.
I think it's a great question, and I do think it's a spectrum, and it is related to the amount that I think that the more you want to make a tattoo about the interpretation or the reading that, or the deciphering that can be done of it, the more you are actually sharing it with others, the more it becomes a common a sort of what do you call it, there's a term for public domain almost, as like a work of art that is transferred to public domain. So your tattoo can be that, like a Matisse painting, for example. You do a tattoo of Matisse painting, it very much becomes a signifier for it, and possibly will tell a certain amount of things about yourself, but tells much more about the painting that it's a representation of than yourself, or the bearer. Whereas if you do something that, if you tattoo a freckle on you, you can tattoo a freckle unless someone comes with a magnifier to look at it. There's a freckle. It's perceived as you as much as any other freckle. So I think this is the sort of very wide spectrum between something that can absolutely not be recognized as an artificial addition to you, all the way to something that cannot be read as anything else than an artificial addition to you. So I think ultimately a well intentioned and informed artist will guide you to decide where you want to place yourself on this specific spectrum.
Okay, Maxime, thank you so much for this. And I want to say thank you to Chocolat and Galina for helping us extend this a little bit as well. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I personally think this conversation could go on for a few hours more, but I think you have a life to live. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to do this. I know that we're all very grateful. Let's give another round of applause.
Yeah,
to
likewise.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much. Thanks a lot to everyone. I don't hear the claps, but I think the algorithm cuts them off. But I appreciate. Thank you so much for the great questions and for the opportunity to go a bit beyond the average conversation on tattooing. I think I do hope there can be follow-ups of some sort from there.
Thanks, Maxime. Okay.
My pleasure.
Everyone.
Have a great evening.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.